German Climate Pavilion at COP29 in Baku. Germany. Climate solutions, fast and fair.
Welcome everybody here in the German Climate Pavilion. How are we doing? Do I get some smiles on that Saturday of the COP29? Yes, energy goes both ways, you know. Thank you for making time and room in your busy calendars. I know we are all running from one corner to another, from negotiations to negotiations, from meetings to meetings, so thanks again for being here. And of course, thank you to our virtual audience from wherever you're joining us, even if it's your after-work tea, going eastwards, or maybe your breakfast going westwards. Thanks for joining us as well in the live stream. Ladies and gentlemen, of course, this event is inspired by the action to do when it comes to decarbonize along the value chain, especially when it comes to making this transparent by harmonizing standards for carbon accounting. And then, of course, along the value chain of heavy industries. That's really what we're going to debate here on stage with policymakers, with industry stakeholders from standardization and international cooperation, and of course with the industry leaders of the industrial deep decarbonization initiative. So we will listen, of course, and hear now more about the challenges. But also, you know, one thing is just to talk about the challenges, but the other thing is really, and I'm a fan of positive psychology, to speak about the opportunities and the solutions that are already on the way forward, that needs more power, more call to action, and also, of course, more your sharing and you're doing. And nevertheless, it comes to the topic and the title of how to decarbonize heavy industries like steel and cement. There are so many different colors and perspectives to that, so it's my big pleasure to be your moderator and to bring with you all the perspectives here on stage. For the official keynote and the start, I welcome now StefanWenzel, Parliamentary State Secretary in the Federal Ministry for Economic Affairs and Climate Action, here on stage. Stage is yours.
Ladies and gentlemen, it's a great pleasure to welcome you here in our German pavilion. Dear Mr. Winterhalter, dear Mrs. Gallus, dear government and industry representatives, esteemed panelists, excellencies. Thank you for gathering today to discuss a critical goal: establishing a common language to improve transparency, fulfill our ambitious climate targets, and create a level playing field for first movers, a norm in a sustainable world. Steel and automotive industries form the backbone of our modern infrastructure and transportation system. But they are also high global carbon emitters. Decarbonizing these sectors is not just an environmental imperative, it is a necessary step towards a sustainable future. We must act swiftly, leveraging technology and policy to mitigate the environmental impact of these essential industries. And innovation drives decarbonization. We saw that in many places, that innovation efficiency in the long run is a very, very important point. We started with solar models in Germany with €1 for 1 kilowatt hour. And now we are in a situation where we have in a lot of regions in the world 1 cent per 1 kilowatt hour. And that's not the end. Advances in technology are enabling the development of low-emission materials that can transform both the steel and the automotive industries. For steel, green production techniques like hydrogen-based and electric arc furnace technologies are paving the way. In the automotive industry, the shift to electric vehicles, the use of sustainable materials in manufacturers are key drivers of change. If you take electric vehicle, it has 75% less primary energy, it needs 75% less private energy than a combustion engine. And however, these solutions need markets to scale. Governments, industry and consumers must collaborate to incentivize adoption and normalize their use. Transparent and standardized CO2 emissions accounting is essential. Accurate tracking allows us to measure progress and instill trust. Harmonized accounting systems are the bedrock of successful decarbonization. On the one hand, they provide customers with the information they need to make informed choices. On the other hand, this enables companies in the value chain to drive decarbonization by choosing suppliers with products that have less emissions, and thereby enables the creation of markets, shaping markets. Clear, consistent definitions of green materials or sustainable materials and products are essential, especially given the complexity of today's supply chains and markets. Our continents offer a lot of different technologies. Green steel, for instance, might refer to steel produced with hydrogen rather than coal. In the automotive industry, it could mean vehicles with significantly lower life cycle emissions. Germany is already leading with initiatives like our concept for the creation of green lead markets, defining green steel, cement and basic chemical materials. At the international level, we are advancing these efforts through initiatives such as the Industrial Decarbonization Initiative and the Climate Club. The automotive industry is an important buyer of green steel and is also leading by example. And it is driving efforts to establish carbon accounting internationally in their complex supply chains with the Catena X digital ecosystem funded by my ministerium. Due to the international interrelationships of the supply chain, it is of paramount importance that both industry and governments within their jurisdiction agree on internationally harmonized standards and rules for calculating the greenhouse gas footprint. Internationally accepted common standards and methodologies are crucial for global decarbonization. Harmonized standards ensure consistency and comparability, facilitating international trade and cooperation. If we look into the history of trade, that was a very important point. To have a standardized, for example, a standard for money, for example. What is money and what is the amount of money? And now we have in a modern world other challenges, but it's on the same field. And they create a level playing field that drives innovation and enables collective progress. These standards are not merely guidelines. They are the structure upon which we build our shared climate goals. But they need to be internationally developed and accepted and implemented, or even referenced by respective legal acts. Collaboration is at the heart of achieving meaningful results. We need policies that incentivize sustainable technologies and support sustainable practices. Today's panel represents the spirit of cooperation, bringing together diverse voices of tackle these challenges. Collaboration between public and private sector, along with international cooperation, will be the cornerstone of our success. On the government side, we must enact policies that incentivize the adoption of sustainable technologies and promoting research and development in sustainable practices. At the same time, industry stakeholders must commit to adopting best practices, investing in sustainable solutions, and continuously innovating. The German steel industry will present an example with the low-emission steel standard called LESS, based on the ministry's lead market concept. This is the first but crucial step in creating these markets, and the ministry strongly welcomes this initiative. Well, we will also hear from the Global Cement and Concrete Association about a similar initiative. In conclusion, decarbonizing these sectors is ambitious but achievable. By focusing on robust carbon accounting, clear green definitions and decarbonizing supply chains, we can pave the way for a sustainable future. International standards and collaborative efforts will be the cornerstone of this transformation, ensuring that our industry thrives responsibility. Thank you. I wish you a productive discussion in the upcoming panels. Thank you very much also for the team who organized this from our ministry, from the pavilion here, and I'm very interested to hear the next keynote. I think it's very interesting. Thank you.
Thank you, StefanWenzel, Parliamentary State Secretary. Yeah, when it comes to the topic of decarbonization, and we're diving now into the question, what is the role then of standardization bodies when it comes to international standards? And for that, I welcome ChristophWinterhalter here on stage. He is the Vice President for Policy at ISO and the Chair of the Board. The stage is all yours.
Thank you very much, Katie. And thanks, State Secretary Wenzel. Ladies and gentlemen, I think you said it all. International standards are a key enabler for this transformation that we are trying to master together. And I think as an international standardization organization, I mean, we are managing the standards that describe the world how it works today. So if we want to initiate the transition, we need to work on the existing standards. And I mean, back in 2021, I mean, ISO gave its climate commitment by saying, we will now, with prioritization, revise existing standard that has climate impact to make sure that climate consideration is taken into account in every single revision of a standard. And on top of that, to include civil society, to include those who are most vulnerable and affected by climate change, that they have something to say and can affect the implementation of these standards. But when I first came to my first COP as an ISO VP, that was 2 years ago in Sharm el-Sheikh, everybody talked about standardization. But 95% of the people that talked about standardization were not aware about international standardization organizations like ISO or IEC. Because they are kind of hidden organizations. They work on the technical details. If something wants to change, we need to modify the existing standards. But there's a lot of ideas about new standards. A lot of needs is seen to develop new standards. But they need to work together with the existing standards, because the existing standards are the base for quality definitions. They're the base for the quality infrastructure, where we measure, how to compare. That's existing standards. So to adopt existing standards and integrate those new ideas, that would be key. So the learning from that discussion that we had in Sharm el-Sheikh is we need to invite the community. We are not just one other standardization organization that has more ideas. And we don't need 1,000 or more standards. We need to adopt the existing standards with all the ideas that we find in a COP. So this year we have like a standards pavilion. So we are inviting the world to talk to us about standardization ideas that have already matured in standardization initiative, and how we could connect these good ideas to the existing world of standards. I mean, ISO, you're talking about 150,000 experts that are managing the world how it works today. If you really want to make a difference, use that expertise to modify it. But having said that, I mean, we need to learn how to bring these ideas together. And I mean, climate change, topics like circularity, have a circular economy going. Talking about hydrogen as a new way of kind of using kind of energy. This will have to be tackled by a lot of technical committees. So we need to have a methodology to how to handle these horizontal topics, bringing people together from different sectors, from different technical committees, and have one guidance saying, this is what we want to achieve, and this is your contribution. But make sure you do it in a similar way, like your colleague does it in a different sector, because then it will be comparable. Now we want to digitalize, so we need to have a digital structure as kind of holding the data that we want to analyze. And they need to be kind of cross-sectorial standardized. So we started something where we invited people when we call it an open consultation process. So our technical committees plus experts from outside really analyzing where do we have standardization needs, let's make a map of what we have and where we need to go, and agree on a timeline and the prioritization, how to tackle these issues. I mean, we did a lot of good groundwork in Germany by developing standardization roadmaps on circular economy, on hydrogen, where we involved all the industry sectors, all the involved technical committees to create these plans. Now this will be adopted on ISO level. But on top of that, that's a different mindset, because I mean the technical community in an international organization like ISO, that's deep down technical details that we are discussing. Here we're talking about the big change that we're intending to drive. So we need to connect the top-down vision, what we want to achieve, with the technical details and the technical expertise of actually how to make it work. That requires a cooperation. And a lot of discussions that are happening here, they're kind of top-down discussions. How we can trigger these changes. So to connect the ambitions of the different initiatives that we see here with the technical details that we have, that is a challenge. And that's why we will invest in partnerships, to really have a partnership concept that enables the ideas that we get from these initiatives to be embraced, understood, and integrated into the technical work of our technical committees. So it's these three elements. To revise existing standard, taking into account climate consideration, to really trigger the transformation. Secondly, invite the people that are not involved in standardization today in an open consultation process. And once we know what to do, to define a fast-track mechanism to integrate the ideas from these partner organizations into our technical work in the technical committees. I mean, this, from my side, is food for thought for the discussion. Thanks for inviting me, and good luck for the panel discussion. Thank you.
Thank you, Christoph, for your perspective and a lot of food for thought already. Now I welcome for the first panel ChristianHochfeld here on stage. He's the director of Agora Verkehrswende.
Thank you very much, and also a very warm welcome from my side. Dear State Secretary Wenzel, dear ladies and gentlemen, I was supposed to moderate the first panel here, but honestly I'm crashing the party, talking about my diploma from 1995, where I did a life cycle assessment on platinum group metals going into the catalyst of a car, and the question was, does it make sense to reduce the emission during the use of the car, while we take into account the emissions from the production of platinum group metals? And it depended very much where the platinum group metals were from. I didn't talk about this diploma for all of my life. And I didn't expect that 30 years after the diploma, I can talk about this. That's why I'm very proud to do the moderation here. I'm doing this not as a, executive director of Agora, but also as a member of the expert circle on decarbonizing the automotive supply chain, the expert circle on the transformation of the automotive industry to our Ministry of Economic Affairs and Climate Action. And I'm very happy to guide you through this first panel, and please join me on stage, that I'm not the only one talking about my diploma, and come on stage. Please, I will introduce you later one by one. Thank you very much, a warm applause. We also have two guests online. That the pressure is high on time, but everything is urgent here in Baku. So I'm very happy to have here with me today Sigridde Vries. She's Director General of the European Association for Car Manufacturer, ACEA. And maybe you can give us the first sense of why is this discussion on standardizing the measurement of embedded carbon in the car relevant for the European car industry?
Happy to do so. Thank you. Hello, everyone. I'm really pleased to be here today in this wonderful pavilion and talking about this very important topic. So, dear State Secretary StefanWenzel, dear ChristianHochfeld, so excited to hear more about your diploma, but maybe we get to that later. I'll indeed say a few words about ACEA. ACEA is the European Association of Automobile Manufacturers based in Brussels, and we represent 15 car, but also van and bus and truck manufacturers in Europe. All the household brands from across the world are represented in ACEA. We represent the car industry towards policymakers because there's a lot of regulation when it comes to vehicles. And our members actually employ over 13 million people directly and indirectly in Europe. They generate together about 7% of European gross domestic product. And they're also, in a way, generating, through their motor vehicle revenues, close to 400 billion euros of tax imports. Tax revenue, sorry, that's very important too, of course, when it comes to financing a healthy and sustainable economy. So these are numbers that give you an idea about the economic importance, the economic footprint, but it also very much explains, I think, why it's so important that industry takes its responsibility as an actor in the fight against climate change. Because it was already mentioned, the mobility sector is a huge emitter of CO2 emissions, but it's also very much a sector in transformation. We are very clear in our commitment to achieve the goals of the Paris Climate Agreement. In Europe, the ACEA members alone invest over 250 billion euros in decarbonizing our industry towards the end of this decade. So that shows that we're not just talking, but really also implementing, we're acting. And that transformation on the road actually means that we by now have almost 400 models of electric vehicles on the roads, and that means that we will gradually see emissions going down from new vehicles, CO2 emissions coming from the tailpipe. But that also makes it even more important to look at the carbon burden in the value chain, because that is growing substantially with more and more electric vehicles on the roads. And that connects us then to this highly diverse, globalized landscape of CO2 emitting industries that are also subject to equally diverse carbon accounting methods. And there we need action, and we really hope to see some of that action also coming from COP29 here in Baku. Because life cycle assessment of carbon footprint becomes more and more relevant in many, many regions around the world. So in Europe, but also in China and elsewhere. And the very basis to produce facts on CO2 emissions remains very much a challenge, and this is what we need to tackle, and what we also hope that this panel today contributes to. Because in a globalized value chain, and that's very much the case in the automotive industry, we have a global supply base, so also a globalized value chain. It's really important that we don't compare apples with oranges, but that we have comparable, transparent, comparable numbers and figures, and that we compare apples with apples. And this is basically, of course, what standardization is all about. And we need indeed to do that, as it was mentioned, across sectors, so not just in automotive, but also in energy, in steel and chemical industries. If we succeed in having transparency on CO2 emissions in our value chain, we will be able to report these emissions using a standardized methodology. We will be able to tackle these emissions in a more effective way, and we will be able to globally align without risking trade disputes, questioning basic facts. So it's very, very important that we get this done. It's a win-win situation in our fight against climate change that we need to do together with many. So we very much appreciate the initiative of the German government and related industry players, and we're looking forward to helping and entering also in these global partnerships, as we will be hearing more about today. So thank you very much for this opportunity, and looking forward to the discussion.
Thank you, Sigridde, and very happy to, warm applause, thank you, to talk you later through the question of your platinum ring and the carbon impact of it, which was also part of the diploma. You pointed out one very important thing from my side, I think, which is the relation to trade. There's no such sector, I would say, like the automotive sector, which is as globalized. And we need the, acceleration and scaling up the new technologies as fast as we can globally. So every trade barrier is a burden also to reducing CO2 emissions. And if we succeed, if having a joint methodology globally to measure CO2, we will be able to accelerate. And if we fail here and everyone has his own, then we will also fail in distributing the new technologies globally. I think that shows the importance of it. That's why I'm very happy that we were sitting together with Thomas, my co-chair. He's the vice president of for sustainability at BMW, along also, tradition in life cycle assessments and methodologies in carbon measurement. And we came out only in summer with a strong call for making CO2 really a hard currency in the automotive supply chain, with, calling for a global process, or let's say first standards agreed globally for CO2 measurement in the automotive supply chains and the supply chains of the automotive car. And maybe you can discuss first, what is the problem at BMW? Is it only BMW? We are excited. And secondly, what are the parts of the solution which we are proposing?
Thank you so much, Christian. I mean, you went back 30 years. I only can offer going back 20 years when I was a member of the German Standards Committee for the ISO 14040 series of standard, which is about life cycle assessment. As the word says, assessment means comparing technologies. That was done based on average numbers, the average steel, the average plastic, etc. And it contributed a lot to making technology choices. But today, we want to and we have to go a big step beyond that. Today, it is about demonstrating, as a company like ours, that you are compliant with the Paris Agreement, meaning bringing Scope 3 emissions below 2 degrees, for example. And with every additional electric car we sell, the importance of the supply chain grows. So what is the challenge? The challenge is to have tools by which you can demonstrate that you are really covering the reality of what you are doing. Secondly, that you compare not steel to plastic, but you compare steel supplier A to steel supplier B. That's the second one. And the third one is you have to allocate money. All decarbonization options we have in the supply chain, aluminum made with solar energy, steel made with hydrogen, plastics made with a higher content of recycled stuff. They all compete for one thing, and that is the euro we get once from our customers. So this is about really optimizing the way we steer the system. And fortunately, and this is the big opportunity, we now are in a very different situation from the 1990s. We have the digital toolbox that will enable us to even manage one of the most complex supply chains you have, which is ours, with 9,000 direct suppliers alone. And Catena X, which is fortunately supported so vigorously by the German government, creates the infrastructure for very much better managing this chain at a global scale. And very clearly, we source steel, aluminum, plastics in many places around the world. We need to be able to properly compare the carbon footprint of aluminum from the Arab Emirates, for example, where we source solar-made aluminum, with steel from the United States. So this is why we believe that a globally standardized logic can massively help us in making better decisions, ensure transparency, and also drive the decarbonization of those industries that supply us.
Thank you very much. I think that gives a sense of where we are heading to. And you also mentioned, for those who have interested in it, the ISO 1440 series on life cycle assessment. And one can ask, why do we need standards? Because there are standards around, and we have also the series 14064, 67 on carbon footprinting. So why another methodology? Why harmonizing still is an issue? And I think we have someone here who could answer this question, hopefully. SilvioDulinski from the ISO, and asking the question, do we really need new harmonized standards, or can we use the old ones? And how do we deal this in a world where standardization is not globally a task of the business sector only, but also standards are sometimes governmental made? This is a very easy question for you.
So, thank you very much. Pleasure to be here. So, the first part of your question is a no. No, it's not a fundamental question of the need of a new standards, actually. There are many, many standards already that exist in the marketplace around the world in many different sectors. And it's about working with the standards that exist. I'd like to go into the second part of what we're talking by what we believe is the role of ISO and how ISO contributes to this question, and not only in steel but more broader. And basically with three words, it's like with three ideas. One is system, the other is convening, and the other is urgency. About the system, so steel standards are useless. So because if you only have the standards about the steel, they will serve for very little if you don't consider the standards that are all around and along that value chain. What are the standards then for the iron that are using there? All the other materials, for the hydrogen that was measured before, for the cars, for automotive. If you don't think along the value chain, standards only for the steels in the vacuum, you can throw them away. And that is true for agriculture, it's true in health. It's like the systemic approach, and that's what I'm coming to. So the systemic approach is very important. We need to think what the standards, what's the purpose they are serving, and how they integrate with what comes immediately before, what comes after, and how they integrate with parallel industries there. And I think that is how ISO approaches standardization. It's like, and then comes to the stakeholders that you mentioned about the government. Actually, it's very important that you have a multi-stakeholder approach when you're developing the standards. If we have only industry developing standards, I think that it's rather, it's like have a very partial view, or very likely we'll have only very partial view of the problematic of what needs to be addressed. How do you bring the others? When governments are only doing regulations, not necessarily the technical state, but it's very important to also have representatives of governments, civil society, academia, and the private sector. So that is a very important part of it. To the second part that leads to my second word, which was about convening. And that's why Christoph mentioned before about the standards pavilion. 3 years ago, we had the ISO pavilion in the COP27. So, but it was a great experience, but it was not enough. We're very short of our ambition of really talking to all the stakeholders that we needed in order to support addressing the challenges that we are talking here every day. It's like, if we don't bring together with us the whole global community of standards developments, users, certification bodies, accreditations, it will not be enough. It's not something that ISO alone or only a few SDOs alone can do this. It's very important to work with industry associations and with the other standards bodies. And that comes with a challenge that we have across many of the players in this industry, which is the syndrome of not invented here. my standard is better than your standard, right? It's like, and we need to go beyond that. We need to really be able to convene on platforms where all the standards developers and all the different industries collaborate and look for that harmonization that we're talking about. Otherwise, we are disputing which is the better standard, and that will lead nowhere. And especially now to my third word, which is the urgency. Mm-hmm. I don't need to convince anyone here about the sense of urgency that we need to address climate change, right? It's like the climate mitigation, all of that. It's like we're all convinced. It's about the solutions. It's like, I think at ISO, when we develop an international standard, that is also almost useless. It's really useful once the countries at national level adopt that international standards and then becomes a reference for all the players in the individual countries. And that is the beauty of having a system that will have 170 national standards bodies that contribute to develop their part of the process of developing the international standards and then adopt that international standard in their national markets, and then are used by regulators as a reference for the policy making of their countries. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Still some work to do. And we were very happy in our working group, but also in the parallel working groups in the ministry, not only to work only with the automotive sector, but working with the representatives along the supply chains, also with the steel sectors. And I'm very happy that we have two representatives of the steel sector now with us. And first I would love to ask Mr. Sparrer a very simple question, and I give an anecdote before. There is a rumor that an automotive customer went to a sales shop of a car and asked the question, I would like to have a car with a green steel. And the dealer said, I don't have this color yet. So give us a flavor of what the color looks like, or what is green steel at the end.
Thank you, Mr. Hochfeld. I hope you can hear me clearly. I can hear myself too. Okay, but I speak a little bit, not as loud, but I try to answer your question. And the green steel, it's hard to define, and that actually was also the question that the industry, but also policymakers and you at the automotive industry were raising. So where's the definition of green steel? These days we call it low emission steel. So maybe the customer comes next time and asks for low emission steel. We will see. However, I would like to give you a short introduction into the activities here in the steel industry. As Secretary of State Mr. Wenzel pointed it out, we have launched the low emission steel standard. We, and that is the German steel industry, and also we from the German Steel Association, as well as with the strong support from the policymakers, and we did this in April together with Vice Chancellor Habeck at the Hanover Fair. And now to give you a short introduction, what is this low emission steel standard? Actually, it's a standard to compare steel producer A with steel producer B on their decarbonization path. So you can clearly see and track if somebody is really going towards a sustainable or more sustainable, more low emission steel. That is transparent and comparable. These are the two very important points I want to make for this standard. And this enables not only policymakers but also first movers then from industry to align or bring it into their sustainability strategies, especially if we talk about green public procurement on a national but also on an international level. These standards can help a lot. And let me point out two key points from my perspective where I see that they were also discussed here in this round, talking about alignment, bringing people together, and that was something I saw developing this standard was well done in my opinion. So we based this standard on existing rules, existing ISO standards, they are very important. Existing European emission trading system rules, they are clear definitions also. And also on the international well-discussed and accepted proposal from the IEA on low-emission steel and near-zero steel. So these were really key elements that we took into account to build this standard. And there's a very important other point that I see, and that was also discussed from previously here on this panel, saying that bringing different industries together as NGOs, scientists, policymakers, and that is exactly what happened, what State Secretary Mr. Wenzel also pointed out during the stakeholder dialogue led by the German Ministry for Economic and Climate Action here in Germany, and we brought together exactly these different stakeholders consulting on this standard, or discussing the standard, finding solutions, and the end is now this low emission steel standard. And there were quite important things that came out. For example, that there's was a clear sign from the demand side to say we want to know the secondary material input, or the share of secondary material input in the steel. We want to know the PCF. We want to know the global warming potential according to EPD, and these were elements that were then really integrated on the label, on the less label that we use now. So these are 2 points from my perspective, and that also brought a wide supportance of feedback that we get from the industry, from the value chain, from policymakers, from NGOs, to say, okay, that was a really good approach to discuss or to define what is green steel, what is low emission steel. And Mr. Hochfeld, maybe next time when we see each other, you say, okay, the customer came and asked for less classification steel, or a classified steel according to a specific level, and that would be definitely probably a step ahead. And let me make 1 or 2 last points. Or the main point is that we have the standard now and we have to use it, especially for the establishment of green lead markets in Germany, but also European-wide, to say, okay, we can now create demand for this low emission steel, for green steel. And here the policymakers can, or politics can really be one of the first movers, but also, of course, industry, like the automotive industry, like the construction industry, can go ahead and say, okay, we lead this demand, we go ahead and be one of these first mover. And the last point also that was discussed, and talking about harmonization, interoperability, and I think there's the steel industry is leading also in this direction with the steel standard principles, an initiative led by the Worldsteel and the WTO, and where we really try to make transparency, to have mutual recognition, and that is very important also from my point of view to have interoperability. Thank you very much for this statement here.
Thank you very much, Mr. Sparrer. And I could have a lot of questions on data, but we do this when people are listening to a podcast before they go to sleep. Otherwise, we lose some people here. That is not intended. I'm very happy now that we have AlliDevlin also online with us. She's from ResponsibleSteel, and I hope this is not a different color like green. But what is your experience and your, let's say, sense of where are we with internalization or internationalization of some definitions like we have here on the green steel? Ali, please.
Thanks very much, Christian. I am delighted to be able to join online here and contribute to the discussion. Your point on internationalization, that's a word, standards is very important. Iron and steel value chain are globally traded. It is a commodity that moves in and beyond country borders, and we need to have the system in place to be able to compare steel in produced in Europe, against steel produced in Asia, in the US, in Australia, wherever it may be produced, we need to have a common reference point to be able to determine the emissions caused by the production of that steel and to determine where that steel is on the path towards near zero. So Responsible Steel, we are a global multi-stakeholder organisation with the mission to be the driving force socially and environmentally responsible production of net zero steel globally. So this global national approach is core to our organisation. We assess ESG sustainability across 13 principles, but today the conversation is about what comes under Principle 10, which is all about greenhouse gas emissions. In 2019, we published the first version of the standard. Since, it has been an evolving document with the latest version published in May this year. The standard has been developed over the last 8 years by a global base, including steel makers, steel buyers, material suppliers, CSOs, and industry associations. So variety and geographical representativeness is just as important as representativeness throughout the value chain to ensure that the standard is equitable, credible, and accessible. We currently have over 160 global members with over 80 sites with core site certification, which represent about 130 million tonnes of steel. And to Silvio's point about the importance of looking up and down the supply chain, we also have a plethora of sites up and downstream of steel making that have core site certification. Our very first steel certification was awarded this year to Big River Steel sites in the US, who can now market and sell their products as Responsible Steel certified, achieving Progress Level 1 for decarbonisation. So that car maker can go to a manufacturer and ask for Progress Level 1 when it comes to steel coming out of Big River Steel site. We have 3 key metrics for assessment when it comes to decarbonisation. The company-level Paris-aligned transition plan, site-level decarbonisation progress levels, which are based on the cradle-to-crude emissions boundary and builds on the ISO 14404 and Worldsteel CO2 methodology with some adjustments to ensure comparability across all steel mills globally, as well as the requirement to provide a product-level life cycle assessment based on that cradle-to-gate emissions boundary. In recent years, the number of emissions measurement methodologies have proliferated alongside the increasing importance of climate change mitigation. Whilst each methodology tends to serve a slightly different purpose, the proliferation has caused immense confusion in the market, convoluted decision-making, and diminished the credibility of any green steel claims. The climate imperative is to utilise the same yardstick to measure the emissions intensity of steel production or products to ensure comparability and restore confidence in the low and near zero emission steel market. Acknowledging that the existence of several standards is a likely reality, harmonisation of existing emissions accounting methodologies is of immediate priority, as well as a wider commitment by actors to not further contribute to the challenge by introducing more standards. Harmonisation will support the reduction of trade frictions across globally traded iron and steel supply chains, reduce administration burdens on steel makers and steel buyers, and facilitate effective and equitable policy making and financing. There are 2 primary aspects of harmonisation. The first are emissions accounting methodologies, how we measure the tonnes of CO2 equivalent per tonne of crude steel, hot rolled steel, final product, whatever it might be. The other aspect is harmonisation of definitions for near zero and low emission steel. What we consider low emission steel in Germany and in Europe should be similar, or if not the same, as what is considered low emission steel globally. The key challenges here lie in aligning where possible, and where not possible, facilitating interoperability. At Responsible Steel, we're actively contributing to global forums like Yannick mentioned, the SSPs, and through direct relationships with organisations to achieve harmonisation. This is not an overnight process and requires concerted effort to align on objectives, ensure net zero compatibility, and establish how coherent interoperation will work in practice. So yes, we need to work at a global scale to decarbonize global steel production and acknowledge that, like greenhouse gas emissions that aren't contained within country or regional borders, we need to look at decarbonisation from that global perspective.
Thanks very much, Ali, and a warm applause also for your. The word is now Steel Steals time from the next panel. So this is why we have to move to the next panel, because we only have a little time left, if this is right. Yeah, I see this is right. Unfortunately, because I think that even if it's sometimes a little bit technical and sometimes maybe a nitty-gritty and not very tangible thing, it shows that the methodologies for measuring carbon on the product side really are the fundament for everything, for trade issues, for making technologies really disseminate globally as fast as we can. So we're really working on the basis of really a responsible and a credible decarbonization of the industrial products. And I think this shows that there is a huge need for harmonization, for dialogue across the globe, and definitely also in the automotive sector. Because with the electrification at the backbone of road transport decarbonization, I think, and the greening of the electricity, the embedded carbon in the car turns out to be more and more relevant, and therefore this thing is more and more urgent to solve. Thank you very much here on stage, Sigridde, Thomas and Silvio. Thank you, Yannick and Ali, for your participation. Thank you for your attendance. And now I'm talking about the rest of the time on my diploma thesis. No, that's not the case. I will hand over to Katie, who will have the chance to moderate the second panel. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much. I will not talk about my diploma in geology. Is that a deal? We continue here. Thank you, Christoph, for the fresh water. We continue here to talk about rather an international perspective, right, when it comes to standards and the way forward in decarbonization. You can hear me well, right? Perfect. It's you against them. All right. Now let's continue, and I warmly welcome my panelists here on stage, and I'll do a quick introduction then here on stage with you. So please join me, Claire, Andrew, and Sajal. Have a seat. Oh, we lost one panelist. Okay, that is the COP casualty. But we have. Oh, that's very kind, thank you. We do have Pete joining us virtually. Thank you. I hope you can hear us, Pete. Hey, Pete. Wonderful. Okay, so let's start. With us is ClareBroadbent. She is the head of sustainability of the Worldsteel Association, and she has, of course, a lot on her table and on her desk. You are coordinating the sustainability strategies of the steel industry. And we heard a lot about the green steel, but if this is really the right impression and the expression, we're going to dive into that in a second. Nevertheless, it's wonderful to have you, Claire. Thank you so much for making time. With us is also AndrewMinson. He is the director of the Global Cement and Concrete Association, so another heavy industry that is on the journey to decarbonization. And in your position, you're focusing on promoting sustainable concrete in construction, which is a big industry and is such a big lever. You're also you led the development of the Net Zero Roadmap for 2050 and the Net Zero Accelerator Initiative, which really translates global commitments into local actions. But what does this mean, coming from global commitments really to find the solutions on the ground to local commitments? We're going to hear that in a second as well. Wonderful to have you on the panel as well. Thank you. Last but not least, joining us virtually from beautiful Vienna, please send some sunshine into these conference halls here in Baku. We do have PeteHemingway with us. Pete, you're the Senior Policy Advisor at UNIDO. And you're leading the Secretariat of the Industrial Deep Decarbonization Initiative, short IDDI. And in that, you are focusing on the CO2 accounting standards and the definition of low carbon product. And I'd like to start with you, Pete. I hope you can hear as well. Maybe you can give us quick a thumbs up. Where do we stand when it comes to harmonization of standards, and what is, of course, also your call to action for our community here in Baku in COP29? The stage is yours.
Thank you very much, Katie. Good afternoon, everybody from sunny Vienna. So my name is PeteHemingway, speaking on behalf of the SEM Industrial Deep Decarbonization Initiative. The IDDI, we're a coalition of governments and private sector partners on a mission to create a thriving market for low carbon industrial products with a primary focus on steel, cement and concrete. To achieve this, we support national and subnational governments to commit to purchasing low carbon materials, in turn signaling demand for those materials and accelerating the transition to cleaner industrial processes. We convene technical working groups to address this really critical need for robust and consistent greenhouse gas accounting frameworks for these products. And in doing so, we provide a sort of neutral and global platform for governments and trade associations, standard setters, industry, civil society organizations to contribute to this mission. And we're the largest initiative doing this with a sort of a strong political mandate and the direct involvement of government officials. Jumping back and looking over the past 12 months, at COP28, we published a white paper highlighting the urgent need for harmonized greenhouse gas accounting standards. And building on this foundation, in April of this year, the IDDI released technical guidance designed to inform this revision of product category rules for construction materials, with the aim of reducing misalignments between the different accounting frameworks, whether they're in ISO or whether they're in SEN or somewhere else, and improving the interoperability of those standards and the data that is coming out of them. This guidance was a big step on the path to a system where data about the environmental impact of steel, cement and concrete construction materials is robust, it's transparent and it's comparable across different regions and different methodologies. And I think it's really important to mention a core philosophy of this work. Coming back to what Silvio was saying, it's that our work is here to improve and to harmonize existing standards rather than to create something new. In the work over the last few months, we've also highlighted a number of gaps in the accounting standard landscapes where the current rules don't provide guidance on emerging topics, such as carbon chain of custody, or indeed for new technologies. And so today, I'm very pleased to announce a new IDDI Secretariat publication titled Setting a Foundation for Carbon Capture and Storage in Product Lifecycle Assessment, which will be available at industrialenergyaccelerator.org today. In the paper, I won't go into the details. We examine what would be required to incorporate emissions data from carbon capture and storage into product lifecycle assessments and environmental product declarations. And the paper makes a series of technical proposals for implementation and recommendations for areas of further discussion. This paper has had input from one of our technical working groups, and I think sort of pays homage to the international perspective that we bring here. Just looking at today's lineup, we had comments and feedback and involved in the discussions were colleagues from BMWK in the government of Germany, Worldsteel, the GCCA, the German Steel Association, just to name a few. I also want to highlight the value of collaboration and the cross-pollination of ideas that we've had with other international initiatives working in this area too. I would like to highlight the SEM CCUS initiative and also the Mission Innovation Carbon Dioxide Removals Mission. There's so much excellent work going on between these different initiatives on this topic of standards and harmonization, and it was great to be able to convene and to marry up those areas of expertise. To wrap up, I would say that sort of robust, trustworthy and interoperable standards for greenhouse gas accounting are absolutely critical in supporting industry on the decarbonisation pathway by helping them benchmark and differentiate products on the market, by helping policymakers and procurers make informed decisions, and ultimately help grow that demand for low emission products. And we call on more governments here to engage in the IDDI process to support these existing initiatives where they exist, rather than creating something new and going off down your own paths, to build something that works in the global context. Thank you.
Thank you, Pete, and greetings to Vienna. Please stay with us for the rest of the panel, of course, as well. Claire, when it comes to the steel industry, and of course, we are so happy to have you here on the panel from the Worldsteel Association. Everybody talks, of course, about decarbonizing heavy industries. Where do we stand in the steel industry in that regard? And again, you know, where do we stand in that journey? Also, with a little bit of an outlook, what is the pain point right now for you?
Okay, thanks very much, and good afternoon, everyone. So the Worldsteel Association is an association of steel producers from around the world. So we're really representing and trying to find the best solutions for the industry as a whole. Obviously, with the industry, we need to make big steps and big changes in terms of our production processes so that we can make these emission reductions. But one of the key things really is being able to, you need to know what you're emitting and measure it in a consistent way so that we can actually then do something about it. And a lot of the work that we've been doing recently, you know, I'm going to compete with Christian from the previous session. We were working on LCA back in 1995 as well. We were also quite fundamental in terms of helping develop the ISO standards on this topic. And that's 30 years ago. But if we look at the landscape now of the standards that are out there, we've just published this week a mapping exercise which includes 45 different approaches to calculating greenhouse gas emissions for the steel sector. This is by no means the total of what's out there. But it sort of is work in progress. Steel is in every different market application. So while we've heard about the great work that Pete's doing under the IDDI, that's just for construction. We've also got automotive and machines and packaging and everything else. So it makes our lives pretty complex. So we did launch last year also the steel standards principles that's been mentioned. But basically this is, now it's got 60 different, more than 60 signatories of different organizations, including ISO, including the World Trade Organization, many of the different steel companies, but also all different types of organizations, with the aim to standardize on methodologies. Everyone wants to do it their way, hence why we keep getting new standards. But this is really a way that we can highlight what are the standards that are out there, how close we are to alignment, and what needs to be done, and the areas where we can more easily align on. So if you check out the Worldsteel website, you can have a great overview of these standards and see, you know, the direction of where these standards are going. And just one thing, you're going to jump in. It's not just about steel, like has been said. We need to make sure that the standards that are being developed are compatible across all materials, with cement and concrete in construction, with aluminium and plastics in automotive, make sure that they are a lot more consistent.
Andrew, before I jump to you, just allow me another question to Claire. As the head of sustainability of the Worldsteel Association, what gives you a headache then right now? Because everybody is moving forward, is on its way, but what gives you a headache on your daily work?
Well, it's a sort of headache, but it's fun. It's very exciting. In 1995, it was the nerds and the geeks who were sitting there with LCA. Now we see it's heads of organizations, CEOs, finance people, customers. It's huge, and it's very exciting. And it's just, I find it very difficult to say no. And my colleague Orsa in the audience, she's forever telling me just to turn people away and things. But it's hard because part of our job is to help people, is to educate people about the decarbonizing of the steel industry, the methodology, and yeah, it's a tough job, but it's fun.
Wonderful. Andrew, coming to your industry, as I mentioned, you're the director of the Global Cement and Concrete Association. From that industry on, where do we stand when it comes to decarbonizing the industry? Just a little quick look into the situation then, of course, where do you like to head on?
Yeah, so we've got a roadmap that we launched in 2021, a global roadmap that gets us, not surprisingly, it gets to zero by 2050. But what's the exciting bit? The exciting bit is that our membership is the majority of production globally, and it's the CEOs who committed to that. Having gone from that global roadmap, we've now got national roadmaps. Once again, what's so exciting about that? We are a catalyst for the countries to do that themselves, the industry and the governments together. All these roadmaps combine technology with policy. One policy every one of these roadmaps have is low carbon procurement. Fundamental building block to low carbon procurement is definitions. Our job in the cement and concrete sector is much easier than our colleagues in the steel sector. Claire's already made the point about the multiple end-use application sectors for steel. And also the different production routes as well, and the fact that you've got different sources of recycled material. So Claire's job is much more complicated than the cement and concrete sector. Our supply chain is also very small. We heard from the automotive before about the complexity of the supply chain. Ours is very simple. A cement plant is located where the limestone is accessed. That's the majority of the CO2 emissions. That goes into concrete combined with aggregate and water. Very short, often vertically integrated. So therefore, we do not have 45 different methodologies. At the production site, we have the greenhouse gas protocol, which underpins the specific cement, energy, and CO2 protocol for Scope 1, Scope 2, and it's going to be extended to Scope 3 emissions at production scale level. That's used globally. For over a decade now, the cement industry has been transparently reporting at industrial scale. So that's, I'm not saying it's easy, but that's largely been done. At the product level for construction, we, and when I say we, basically global construction uses environmental product declarations. Pete is absolutely right that we haven't got perfect harmonization is a particular word, but we haven't got consistency for all EPDs globally. But we're almost there. We are not going to wait, we have not waited until we've got the same EPD system globally to come up with definitions for low carbon and near zero product to help procurement. Remember, 3 minutes ago I said procurement is one of our key policies to enable decarbonization. Key to underpin that is to be able to know what you're procuring is low carbon or near zero. So we're using the standards that already exist. They're all under the ISO standard, but some nations apply them slightly differently to come up with definitions. We haven't created these definitions in a vacuum. We've worked with Pete's organization, UNIDO, the Secretariat for the Clean Energy Ministerial Industrial Deep Decarbonization Initiative. We've worked with the International Energy Agency, and we used their publication from 2022 as a robust starting point for cement and concrete definitions. We're delighted that in Germany they've adopted the IEA methodology for cement, and our colleagues there in the Cement Association from January will be available to label according to that methodology, which is identical to the definitions that we're launching on Monday for cement. In addition, we're launching concrete definitions, which overcome this issue of EPDs being different in different countries. So I said the standards are not the same everywhere, but we've got a methodology that means it's interoperable. So you take the global definitions and you can adapt them if needed. In Germany, they don't need to be adapted. In Germany, the same definitions can be used. In the UK, they need to be adapted. And so we're in that process with the UK, such that an A-defined product in the UK and an A-defined product in Germany will have a different numerical value, but it is apples with apples. We heard earlier from the Association of Car Manufacturers about consistency, comparing apples with apples. Our methodology enables that. You can go on our website under the policy section and you can read about what those definitions are, or we're delighted to be supported by the German government, sending the relevant minister to our stand on Monday to launch these definitions to enable, to underpin low carbon procurement policy.
So everybody has a new publication or a reading list, like a recommendation from this panel. Wonderful. We're going to share the news later on. Nevertheless, we are here at the Climate Change Conference in Baku, COP29. So, Andrew, what is your expectation coming out of this conference? And we spoke earlier, you were just rushing from one other event now to this event. You have another event coming on. What is the most urgent question that you get asked these days?
I'm going to stick on the same theme. It's adoption of these definitions in order to underpin low carbon procurement. So 2 hours ago, we sat in the same event 2 hours ago on carbon capture and storage. So that's all about carbon capture and storage, fundamental to decarbonising our industry. Ultimately, we cannot decarbonise just through a clean grid because we've got a chemical reaction which happens with limestone, emits the CO2. We can do lots of other things to reduce the amount of clinker we need, to use it more efficiently. We need to do all those things, 64% of the reductions, but we've got a remnant that needs to be carbon capture and storage. One of the ways that we'll get that to have a business case for investment is low carbon procurement. So even at that stage, I talked about adoption of these definitions at national level so that we can get the low carbon procurement policy happening.
Let's open the floor for, I would say, 2 questions from the audience. If you have questions, give me a hand sign. Otherwise, I do have more questions coming along. Yes, everybody is smiling or looking away. That's always the good thing when moderator. Yeah, there is a question. Wonderful. Hang on. Yes, thank you. The number 7, please, guys. Wonderful. Sorry, excuse me.
Yeah, so my name is Dieter Maupel.
Tell us who you are first, so we know you.
From the German NDE, National Designated Entity under the technology mechanism. And I also work with IDDI on standards. So I think first, congratulations, Andrew, also for coming out with a concrete standard. I would be interesting from you to hear. So we heard a lot about happening in Europe and other developed countries. What does it take for a country like India or a country in Africa to take on those standards? Yeah?
I can promise you that was not a pre-prepared question, but that is the perfect question. Thank you for that perfect question for India. So I've got a meeting this week with India, and it's with a consultant who's got a coalition in the construction sector. And we read a document from them about 6 or 8 weeks ago, which said, we've looked at what global procurement definitions and policies and etc. are, and we don't think any of them are relevant to India, and we're going to invent our own. And I went, no, don't do that. Please don't do that. We've invented a wheel. We've invented a wheel. Don't reinvent the wheel. Our wheel is, it might be a metal wheel. It's going to have a rubber tire on it. You can make the rubber tire to suit your country, to suit your custom and practice. And I really hope, you talked about what the next challenge is, I really hope that India, one of the biggest markets, will actually adopt us. I mean, they are co-chairs of the Industrial Deep Decarbonization Initiative. We hope they'll adopt the wheel that we've invented. I say our wheel, it's not our wheel. We've adjusted and adapted, and people in the room know we've done this. We've adapted and adjusted our wheel based on what the large stakeholder audience have said. So we think it is the right wheel, and it can be adapted. You can put your own rubber tire on it for your own country, which still enables the consistent comparison from India to Germany to the US to Canada.
Thank you. Any more questions? Oh, yes. I'm not gonna throw the microphone to you. Thank you so much. Tell us who you are. And then, of course, your concrete question. It's already switched on.
Hi, my name is Ketan Ahuja, and I work with Harvard's Growth Lab, helping countries align their growth trajectory with decarbonization. And
can you put the microphone a little bit closer to you so we can hear you better? Yeah.
And my question is, how do you imagine standardization will impact international trade in cement and steel? Do you imagine it to increase international trade in low carbon products?
Claire and Andrew? Claire, would you start this time? Thank you.
Yeah, I think we need to have common standards, common definitions to enable a level playing field. And I think once if you've got those common methodologies, the common ways of measuring your emissions, then it enables the trade, because you've got commonality around the world through common definitions of what it is that you're selling, a common way of measuring those emissions, and then that enables it on a global level.
If you're exporting cement from Vietnam to the west coast of the US, you can just do your EPD and go to a different part of our EPD tool, other EPD tools. Just go to the different part which chooses the US standard, and you'll get your EPD in the format that's consistent with the market into which you're selling it. So actually, we're already there. So that's not a barrier to trade for cement and concrete. Concrete generally is more local. There's a bit of cement trade, and my answer applies to that.
Any addition? Did we forget anything? No, that's good.
Yeah.
Thank you. Thank you for your questions. Pete, would you like to add something to that? It's always, as a virtual participant, you're there, but you're not physically here. But we do see you and we do hear you. Where would you like to join in?
Yeah, certainly. Just on that last point around international trade, I think as we see the proliferation of border adjustment mechanisms, so the EU CBAM, the UK CBAM, and then quite sort of robust domestic procurement rules, such as the Federal Buy Clean initiative in the US. These requirements for greenhouse gas accounting to very specific methodologies already exist and are only going to grow over time. And so the sooner we can get in at the ground level and ensure that these policies and the reporting requirements under them are based on international standards that everybody's got equity in and everybody's aligned with, then actually we can reduce the frictions with global trade, and we can reduce burden for these manufacturers. If I could then jump back to Deetram's question as well, I think there's an interesting piece here on sort of capacity building, knowledge transfer, technology transfer between the global north and the global south, where we do see quite a strong divide. The IDDI, we do have a number of sort of quote global south members, but the majority of the discussion here is really driven by the global north governments. And so there needs to be a greater sort of international push on broadening the conversation here. And there are a few really good examples of this popping up through the Clean Energy Ministerial, but also these north-south industrial hubs that are popping up. So you may be aware of the UK-Brazil hub, the Canada-Thailand hub that's just begun, both within UNIDO, and then the Sweden-India hub within LEADIT. And so we are starting to see the sort of the germination of these ideas and this closer collaboration. But we need people really to rally around it, push it, and crucially, everybody push in the same direction on the same things and not create something new.
Thank you, Pete. And with that, I'd like to respect your calendar. Thank you to Claire.
Can I just add one other thing on the last question? Just in terms of the sort of commonality between different systems, one of the things we're seeing now a lot is how people are selling their steel products. And we have all the definitions and the standards and methodologies, but when we're going on to the green steel products, companies are selling their green steel products with different labels, and quite often nowadays we're seeing that people are using a chain of custody approach for assessing the emissions and using mass balance and basically making emission reductions in your site and apportioning those emissions to different products. And that's being done in different ways around the world. And if we can harmonize on that as well, then it helps also in terms of the understanding for consumers, for stakeholders, in terms of the products that they're seeing on the market. And this is yet another thing that we've published on our website again this week, so some more reading. But it's our first sort of go at trying to have this harmonization of approaches for defining these emissions. And it's not intended that we do this by ourselves as an industry. We've heard that we need all sorts of other stakeholders involved, so we welcome your feedback. And we also want to make sure it's applicable to other materials as well. So we'll be working closely with Andrew to try and make sure that this is something that can be developed on a global multi-material level.
Wonderful. Thank you to all of you. Thank you to Pete, to Andrew, and to Claire for making time in your calendar and for being on our panel. Nevertheless, as we had one COP casualty, it's wonderful having had you here on the panel. This is your round of applause. Merci beaucoup. And just as some closing remarks, maybe you realized that yesterday was the day of the event on driving demand for decarbonized heavy industries. November 20th, it's coming up another event about scaling up the demand for green steel with a call to action. So please mark your calendar. And just around the corner on Monday 18th, is the launch of the GCCA definition for green cement and a definition harmonization of standards. So a few more things and dates where we see each other again. Lovely having had you here in the German Climate Pavilion for this session. Enjoy the rest of the day. Thank you.
Welcome to the German Climate Pavilion at COP29 in Baku. Germany. Climate solutions, fast and fair.